Thanks again. We thought that we would end the day with you having a chance to hear from the folks on stage who you've not had a chance to hear from in their breakout sessions, recognizing that we could only, at the most, we were going to see two, and maybe we saw, how are we going to do, originally we were all going to see two and we were all going to split up, but even given the way that we had structured it today, I think it was nice. It was a nice opportunity for the fellows to spend time with each other and see their peers work. So that was helpful. But this is an opportunity for each of them to expand a bit on the themes that they had outlined earlier when they were introducing their curriculum units. And I thought they could do that. Tell us some of the key questions that you think were important in trying to answer through the activities that you were developing. And also what you've gleaned from the conversation today that you might want to inject into your materials as you go back and polish them up, given the feedback that you're getting from the group today. So this is an opportunity for all of you to provide more of the feedback that you've already provided in your breakout sessions. And you'll have another opportunity to do that through the link that we'll provide. But again, the idea here, starting back when we began this program, is to develop curriculum materials to help us teach about democracy more effectively. And today was intended to be a workshop in every sense of the term. It's to present these materials. This is where we are. Help us polish these so we can then disseminate them to teachers around the Commonwealth who can use them in their classrooms in the coming year. Where we go with this is still, with the program as a program, is still open to question. There will be future biennials, and I think from a broader perspective, it would be interesting to hear from you, not just on a micro, but on a macro perspective, what role you think the university can play in helping to bridge the gap between the secondary school experience and the university experience, particularly in the space of democracy education. So, Clooney, do you want to start? Start right here.
Sure. As one of the loudest people I know, I have a hard time with a microphone, but so the American dream. I've been teaching now for a while, and getting my kids excited about being Americans and playing a part in what being an American is all about, participating in the government, believing that they can make change happen, has been a real struggle. So to me, the American dream, getting them to not buy in so much, but to make the American dream theirs, their own. What is your American dream, and how does that make you feel about being an American and about your future as an American? It's questions about identity, about belonging, about community, and that's what I wanted to do, was promote the idea of democracy coming from a very personal standpoint, right? I'm a part of this democracy because this dream is mine. So that's what I'm hoping to do. I've started with a little bit of my program, with the lessons so far with my classmates or my students, and so far it's gone pretty well. But still looking at refining participation and encouraging a school-wide approach to it, not just the kids in my room. I want everyone in the school to be a part of the school community and to see that as part of the larger community as well. So that's where I'm heading with this so far.
All right, my topic was the presidency, which I guess is kind of the other end of the spectrum from a very personal view of democracy to the sort of iconic figure of democracy. It was broken down into 6 units, starting with Washington and going through the Cold War, and trying to give a variety of different activities to look at, how is the president elected? Does he, through a democratic process, does he really represent the people? Does a president's style really embody and project this idea that he is the leader of the people or the servant of the people, or vice versa? And then the third lens was sort of looking at how the president's use and definition of executive privilege, executive authority, executive powers, and when a president is accused of abusing those powers, how much of it is that he is genuinely pushing against the definition and understanding of democracy at that time, and how much of it is just partisanship. So it's, if you all could look at the material and give me feedback. I'm a big believer in the best way to get a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. And so I really like collaboration and feedback. And the idea, I think, for me was to create a kind of diverse program where people could pick and choose and not necessarily feel like they had to follow it A through Z. They could, go, I'll do this one, I'll do this one, I'll do this one, and I'll tailor it to my class.
So with the lessons that I created, it was all about governing America. And I was telling the group that I was kind of trying to connect the 3 things that we talk about, which is the Electoral College, Congress, and the judicial branch. And they are all connected, right? Because the Electoral College chooses the president, and the president nominates federal judges, and Congress approves those federal judges. So they are all interconnected, sometimes more than we really want them to be. But what I wanted students to do is to be able to look at the institutions that have existed for lots and lots of years and decide, is this really what's best for democracy for our people here in the United States? And so we actually look at alternative things. We kind of critically decide, is this the best way things can be run here in the United States? And students get to express their opinion. That was my goal in all of this, was they can say one thing and still be right versus another student who says something else and also be right. It's learning to back up our opinions with facts, which is something that is severely lacking in politics today, or discussing politics today. So I am also open to feedback. I've already gotten some great suggestions from the group today. So I'm going to look at implementing those, but if you look at my materials, I would love your suggestions and feedback as well.
Hi. A few years ago, I realized I wanted to refocus the way I teach government to high schoolers on what they could do to make a difference. And part of that meant finding out what they cared about enough to want to make a difference, and also showing them that they could make a difference, that it was possible. It's infusing democracy into the classroom. Democracy, a system where people have power to affect what government does. So as I was making these modules centered around living democratically, I was thinking about some trends, some commonalities between the units. And they are, what is democracy? Exploring the definition, and also some things that people historically have said should go into a healthy democracy, and to see what the students think about that as well. Exploring who we are, looking at demographic changes in the US, and how when the people change, how can that inform who changes policy and what new things government does. Looking at how we vote and who actually has access to make those changes and to vote for the leaders who do, and comparing different rules and different systems. And also how our Constitution itself has changed over time, and what students think about how it might. And all these things involve students looking at the US critically. We just started the mock election in my government class. where my students run for office and they spend a couple months campaigning and writing ads and polls and making speeches. And one of my students ran, and I remember this line because it was just like 2 days ago, but he said, "I love my country, and to love is to criticize." And he talked about what that meant for him and why he could stand before his class in the very beginning of a project that hadn't even formed yet and say, here's what I want to do to make our country better, and here's why it's the opposite of unpatriotic to be asking for more from the country I'm part of. And I want my students to be able to do that. And that was kind of fun to see. And I think that informs a lot of what I've done here. I love the suggestions, and it was good to hear that what helps teachers is having something that is modular, that they could take a piece out of and still use. That having links to explore other places was really helpful to know where to go, especially if you're providing students with some curated content, which is really helpful for beginning researchers or whether you want to leave it wide open. Just our conversation today made me think it would be nice to provide a higher level and more like entry level form of each of the units too. And I teach English language learners as well as AP students, and it just made me think I could provide some of the stuff I've already done to do that and think of some ways which would help me to do that as well. And I guess one last thing, from the discussions we heard today, both of them, while we were in this room, made me think about deliberately including in some of these lesson plans more about the forum we create when we discuss these ideas. The idea at the start of the day about how conversation could have 3 different goals. You could have dialogue, where you're partly sharing who you are and connecting; deliberation, where you're trying to reach consensus; and debate, where you're contrasting ideas. That all of those could be valuable, but maybe the first 2 don't get used often enough in a political context. And then later in the day, what did I write down? Oh, just the idea that actually, no, that's from earlier too. But the idea of having more small group discussions, which are set up with conversational themes, where in the end it's not about talking to the teacher and the teacher talking back. Deliberately placing into the lesson plans, right? Even if we all do that in our classroom at different points, it's nice to know here's a great place for that to go, and here's a way you can check in afterwards to see how it went.
Oh, I got that on my camera.
Your own.
I do, yeah. So it's a nice segue here. So my lessons were, they're very highly aligned to the 8th grade civics curriculum for Virginia. And my overarching question is, what actions exemplify a good citizen or a great citizen, right? What do we expect our citizens to do? And, there's kind of the standard things you teach students, but I actually was inspired by the Civic Health Index to look at, what are some gaps in civic behavior and kind of use that to inform some of the lesson materials I created. So a lot of the lessons that I made are aligned to, what are civic duties, what are civic responsibilities, and then I bring in the First Amendment. But then I start to talk a little bit about, group membership and identifying people in your community who are, who are civic leaders. Why are they civic leaders? Why did the Biennial select certain people to be a part of the Biennial? What qualities do they have? What do they do? I was trying to get them to, make the connection between, good citizenship and informed action. And that's something I always thought made the content much more meaningful for my students, especially giving them an authentic audience, which I know can be difficult for people. And then so my unit kind of progresses through those lessons and culminates with a project-based assessment where students create a civic award, and the award is vague, so they can decide what they think constitutes good citizenship, and they can decide the criterion that they come to using a decision-making model. And we had some really good conversations about how to scaffold talking about citizenship skills and almost using the school environment as an entry to talking about a community in general, that talking about school and talking about your role as a citizen in school and power in school and participation in school, that is really a good entry for students to make connections to communities and see themselves as a community member. And then they can bring that skill of being a community member at school to even in the same year that you could scaffold up to the project I had or anything else that we were talking about here. And so this whole day's kind of made me rethink about we have like really thick standards to get to, right? But the takeaways are trying to build habits, right? It's like muscle memory and getting students to think about opportunity. Like I think about my first grader, and she was gonna run for class representative, and she decided not to, and I was crushed because, like, as a civics teacher, I was crushed. But then, because I was like, why? And it had to do with a boy. It was terrible. I'm still brokenhearted. But then she said she wanted to be a part of the news team instead, and so she found another way to be involved. And I think like having those kind of conversations in saying this is a part of school, talking about your participation in the community and how you're going to be a part of something is a learning experience that, I know we said, well, maybe school, like I think there was an implication that it may be, students need models outside of school. But if they don't have those models outside of school, the school needs to be a place for that. So I'm hoping that my unit can give people an opportunity to do that. But I really think about how I might restructure this around have a kind of a parallel option that uses school as the community where our discussions take place. So.
Can I ask you a question? And this goes for everybody, but since you brought it up, I'm interested in your thoughts. Sure, I'll so again, because this is being taped, right? So Tina, I'll ask you the question because you brought it up, but this is for everybody. You referenced the biennial, and all of our work was informed by the biennial. Certainly that was the intention, to be informed by the biennial. But as you indicate, it created a certain narrative about democracy, or given who was represented in those sessions, we were saying something about what mattered, right? These were the voices that we were listening to. When we think about democracy, or the voices that are telling us what we should be thinking about. Is it your sense, and the rest of you, that it was less inclusive than it might have been? Are there themes, ideas, concerns that were maybe not being raised that might have? Because I'm thinking about the way that we all structured our units, American Dream, living democratically, presidency, of course. And the presidency wasn't really a central focus of the biennial, but of course it's important when we talk about democracy, and the others as well. And this is not designed to tell the folks who are designing the next biennial, hey, you guys need to pay attention to this. But it is important to recognize which voices we're listening to. And I just was struck by your remark there, so I want to give you an opportunity to expand on that.
I actually thought it was very inclusive. And I really liked, I think about, I don't want to mispronounce her name, Ai-jen Poo.
Yeah.
And her viewpoint on her panel was very strong. She represented, is it domestic workers?
Yep.
Yeah, so she represented a union of domestic workers, and I just felt like, for me, that having people with that kind of voice, there was also a man who was a religious community leader. I can't think of what his name was, in Chicago, outside of Chicago. And so I felt like there were community members. It was not just people from cabinets that were, and like for me, those were people who inspired me the most. I made a little choice board, and they are the features on there. There's a couple of, like, one or two political figures, maybe even one, but I don't know. I thought it was inclusive. Now I think some of the topic areas, in terms of what's discussed, I'd really have to go back and look at it again.
Right.
But the people who are advocates do a great job of talking about their subject. I thought, like, they were able to shift the questions in a way where they got to say what they wanted to say. And so I think that's really just being mindful of always being mindful of who's not being discussed. But in terms of representativeness, I don't know. I felt that, like, you had good segments of the population. I mean, maybe teachers. That I always think having, like, people who are, like, having teachers, or maybe not necessarily the person who is the lead advocate, but people who are, like, on the ground doing that work. that is a powerful conversation to have too, especially as a teacher. I know when I listen to a Department of Education secretary talk about the state of education, I'm like, I'm not sure you are totally informed of what the state of education is, you know, so just being mindful of the expertise. Yeah, I agree. I think maybe the different roles, but in terms of organizations, I thought it was well represented.
Yeah. Whenever the term "thank you for your service" is rolled out, and it is rolled out in appropriate ways, I do think of teachers. I think they are every bit as central to the health of the nation, the security of the nation, as others in the community. Having been a classroom teacher, K-12 as well, I understand what it is, but even more so now in the contemporary climate, it's a real challenge. So thank you for your service. I'd be interested in hearing from you folks as well, what you have gleaned from today, what you have thought most significant, what you would want to push our fellows on. Yeah, think harder about. Develop this more intentionally.
You know, I've participated I've been fortunate to participate in these types of workshops over the last several years, and I'm not sure I always walk away with tangible benefits, but I think today I can say, you know, these are actually really well organized tools that we can pass on to classroom teachers, people on the ground. And so in that sense, I just want to say thank you to the program, I guess, that you guys have participated in, because maybe it's a structure or whatever it is that you've done all together, but you know, I can hold it in my hand and say, look, there's a lesson right there. Use it. Yeah, so it's been great.
I don't teach government, and I never have, but you know, I'm a librarian, so I cover all kinds of things, and I just wanted to say that I really came away today with an appreciation that your lessons all teach students to grapple with institutions and to question them, and then to also think about how they can be changed. I don't think that, I'm an old person, so I don't think that when I was coming through K through 12 that we were taught the presidency is this way, the Congress is this way, and this is how it works. Not that this is how it works, but is that a good idea? I don't remember thinking that way. I don't remember producing any work that way, or I don't remember that being the point of learning about it, was to question, like, is this the best way? Could this be better? Is everyone included? And I really, really appreciate that those are the questions you're asking your students to contemplate across the board. I mean, in every discussion we've had. Not that they need to learn that this is how it works, but that they need to be thinking about that.
They do need to learn how that's how it works, but they also need to learn how to do that appropriately. And I think that's why we've gotten to the state of where we are now, because people have not learned to do it properly. So it is one of my passions personally to give students a voice.
I really appreciated everybody accepting me as an elementary school teacher here, since it wasn't really geared towards towards my grade level, but people were really helping me think about the scaffolding, and I think all of you have talked about, how we can implement that at various levels, because I do think it's really important to start from the beginning. I've seen a lot of there's a lot of interwovenness between the things that all of you are doing. And one of the things I was wondering is if there would be a way to sort of, for lack of a better term, hashtag, parts of what you're doing in the different areas, so that they could be used when we're not just using one full, that one of the lesson sets, but we want to use parts of all of them. So, some communication between, I know you guys communicate, but, thinking about where the intersections are so that we can pull the great things that all of you guys are doing together. And this is not a comment about but one of the things that I thought a lot about today is who has our back as teachers. And when we're dealing with these difficult conversations, how far can we go? And when we are going to those difficult conversations, at what point do we, I love the comment, we have to hold the line, because if teachers don't hold the line, then we've kind of lost the battle. But that's a hard line to hold, and so it's not really something I'm expecting anybody to answer, but it's just something that's always in my mind about these really, I think, very important conversations that we're having with students. And maybe I think about it a lot as an elementary teacher because, I think part of the reason we say middle school is because there's this question of how young is too young. When do we start having difficult conversations? And yet I think that difficult conversations, and you can't teach about these things without those difficult conversations, obviously appropriately handled, but they come out pretty early on. And so we're just in a climate where I think that's always in the back of my mind. I want to do it. I want to do it right. And then I also am thinking I'm putting my career on the line at times to have these conversations. So.
Just to follow up, I thought about that too, particularly in the conversation with Paula and Neely, and wondered about the ecosystem within which this entire conversation is taking place. And I do wonder whether a subsequent forum such as this might benefit from having a Neely type of person, a district type person, somebody from central office, a principal, somebody from the school board. So as we go up the food chain of responsibility and authority, because who does have your back is a real question. We're in the classroom here, and it's a sacred space, and we want to be able to realize a vision for these students. But it exists in a much larger framework, and we don't have the control over that we'd like sometimes. Some of these other folks do have some more power and authority, and it may be worthwhile to bring them into the conversation about how to have these courageous conversations. Now, you may have done that already. It may happen all the time where you are. But I'm just wondering, taking this kind of activity forward, would it make sense to broaden the population of the folks who are participating in the conversation? I don't know.
I think it certainly could. We could benefit from having a voice represented from higher up the food chain, I guess, as it were. But we talk all the time about building connections and relationships with our students in the classroom. You need to build relationships with your administration and colleagues as well. It's just as important. And I am, granted, very fortunate right now to work with an administration who wants to work with the teachers, who wants to know what we're doing, who is invested in how we're doing things. And building that trust level has been crucial because I don't want to say get away with, but I am allowed to do things that a lot of teachers are scared to do. I know that. But my principal has our back. And that's something that you kind of need to cultivate. Now, not everybody has a principal that will allow you to cultivate, I've been in that situation as well. But you have to work all the fronts, everyone, to get people on board.
Just adding another audience for this, would school boards go to workshops and so forth? So that's another important audience.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're really supported by district honestly, for example, Fairfax County School Board just had a school board meeting about trying to pass something called Truth in Education. It didn't pass because the language was fraught and there was a lot of disagreement about it. But when those I always I always encouraged my administrators to, anytime there was an event in the news, to kind of set the tone for what the conversation should be like, or what it might be like at the school, that kind of gives us a point to say, okay, it's okay for us to talk about this, and you might make mistakes. We always start with the facts, and nobody's humanity is up for debate. And I feel like that's a good starting place. And I don't know if I know a lot of social studies teachers that I worked with who hadn't had a parent call and complain at least once about something you said, and it's either a learning moment, or, you have an administrator that can help you. But I think there has to be that space for teachers to try to get it right, because you're not going to get it right the first time. And I definitely didn't do it right the first time, but I got better at it as I got more experience. So, and it's hard to do, but having an administrator and a policy and a school board that wants you to talk about facts, then you're in a better shape to have like dialogues and discussions,
Well, I mean, going back to the question about, broaching these topics that are, there's pushback against bringing them up. You have to do it for the students to challenge them to think, and there is going to always be a little bit of a level of discomfort or more. I think the main thing is to sort of know your students, read your audience, and look for the opportunities they open up. Because while you do want to challenge them, you also don't want to do it in a way that shuts them down. And it's finding that balance. And unfortunately, and perhaps I'll say perhaps it's done with the best of intentions, but when people are setting any kind of policy, they want everything to be very black and white, set in stone. And reality doesn't work that way. Teaching doesn't work that way. And unfortunately, because the lines are sometimes a little bit vague and blurry, you have to run the risk of stepping over them. And that's just something that time and experience will perhaps help you avoid to some degree, but I don't know. It's, I've spent the last few years mostly talking about how to teach about slavery in the classroom. And it's kind of shocking to me that teaching about democracy is now, and not that teaching about slavery should have been controversial, because you point to the facts, the documents. This is what happened. I'm not making this up. This is the way it was. And as long as you can point to that, this is the historical record. I feel like you've always, not only, you're going to have that to back. You can't argue with the facts. You can argue with interpretation, but if you're worried about that, then just throw out the facts. Make them read the documents. Make them, look at the data and interpret it for themselves. And then listen for their questions and see where you can go with it.
I would just say, in not arguing with the facts, at the school where I work, a school staff member's name somehow came to the attention of a propagandist website, and her name was splashed all over the place. And other people who believed the same as this propagandist website started putting her name out, and it became a very dangerous situation very quickly, and it had nothing to do with facts. And in the after effect, the facts don't make any difference. There's no way to engage with it. And in the Commonwealth of Virginia, with a new Board of Education, with a tip line for teachers, and all the other book banning and book burning in Fredericksburg and other things, it would be nice to think you can just say the facts and build relationships with your kids, but it's just not that straightforward at all. You can lose everything. And there's not even a really, one thing I've learned from this situation is that there's not even a way for your administration to go to bat for you. There's nobody to defend against. You know what I mean? Like, it's just out there. It's out there and it's done. Aside from that, another constituency that I think would be great to have here would be some students.
with what you said. Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it's something I think about a lot, and it makes me, as much as I love teaching history, I'm kind of glad my son's a math teacher. He won't have to worry about it as much.
So I think I'm finally ready to push. And I'm going to use Alan's example of this student who said that challenging or questioning is patriotic. And so I'm seeing this common thread between the themes that you've explored, and I'm wondering if all of you should add this somewhere in your lessons, this question of what does it mean to be or to act American versus un-American? What does it mean to be patriotic and patriotic? And I think as educators, we would like to empower students with the sense that questioning is patriotic. And one of the things we know in my own home with my high school students, we want to take that back, right? We want to own that. So we're talking about, a lawn sign about Black Lives Matter. We should surround it with American flags now, right? Because that's what America should be. It should not be this artificial divide that somebody owns the flag and with opinions that don't agree with mine.
That's an aspect of my lessons, is what does America look like? What does it mean to be an American? So yes, I agree. One, it needs to be discussed, and two, if the kids don't believe it, that there is such a thing, then they're not going to participate. They need to be able to hold it, make it theirs.
The lady who joined us virtually, I wrote it down because it was, but what values and skills to participate in a democracy? And the values part is something that could be defined. I mean, or at least a discussion on what are the values. So, because, it's hard to, I don't think people get angry when you talk about the values, because a lot of times they're interpreting it like, oh, I have that value. So I do think values are important with this. And anyway, but that along with the skills.
So the only thing I'll add to that is that, the civics curriculum implies values in the standards, I think. When they talk about civic act, they talk about, duties, responsibilities, that kind of thing. So, I mean, that's kind of where I always went, is the implication of the standards. So it's, and the others are things students bring in.
I just wanted to go back to the sort of the question of the wider audience, and I was wondering if there was any thought of reaching beyond social studies educators, which seems to be the predominant group here, and to reach out to language arts teachers or English teachers or other subjects even further afield that might bring a new perspective and additions to this as well.
Always, always, always want as many teachers on board as possible. And I mean, I was thinking a lot of the stuff that I do in my lesson plans involves data, statistics. The teacher right next to me is the statistics teacher. Surely the two of us could work together to come up with some really interesting ways to go about looking at this information. The only problem with any of this is how many teachers do you have in your school and are all your SOL courses covered? Because that's what we're facing now. I'm teaching African American history right now. Yay, I probably won't next year because women's history is going to have to make, and we can't have both of them. It's one of those things where, I mean, it's number of teachers versus what courses do you need to have, and who can afford to give time up for other things added. Always willing to work with other teachers. I think most of us would be, if not all of us. It's just a matter of time and structure of the school itself.
Sorry, can I add on to that, though? I do think that teachers who are not, so as a social studies teacher who used to hear a lot of talk in teachers' lounges, et cetera, I know that civic themes and current events and stuff are coming up in other classes, and we always get the courageous conversations training, and I think we get the controversial topics training, and then when the kids ask the other teachers about topics, they don't have the same responsibilities that we do. I do think that there is a wider audience for, even if you're not going to do official planning with the other teachers, that they need to know how to insert these themes of engagement and that kind of thing into and how to talk about these kind of topics in their classes.
I was going to say, yeah, for me, I used to coach the middle school debate team, and sometimes the students on the debate team would actually be my own students in the classroom, and I would always hit them with a trick question at the end of the year. Did you learn more in debate or in my classroom? And it's because they learn more in debate, because they own it. But pushing back on, I forgot who said you should strive for consensus as opposed to debate. That might be true, but the kids love to compete. And like when Stephanie was talking about those students who were paired together in that competition, they're bound by the fact that they're on the same team. And so I think at least in terms of civil dialogues, in terms of some of the skill sets, like in order to how to make change by, contacting these folks or not, or legislators, that's different. But in terms of actually getting them to have these high levels civic discussions, the problem is time, because you could build you should almost build a history curriculum around debates, as opposed to what they do now, whereas everyone wants to get as much information as possible. And I make the comparison, it'd be like in an English class where you assign too many novels, you're going to end up reading the Cliff Notes. You can't do it. And so we have to cover all this content. I could easily organize my curriculum around debate, like we're doing election unit. Should election day be a holiday? Should we have voter ID laws? And you just give the kids. They have to you have two teams and you have 4 subtopics, and they have to prepare for both sides of every issue, and they'll do it. But it's the time, in so many. It's the time for us. Because you have the SOLs, which end up being, that's why the IB programs are so much, to me, but it's more writing. By the way, writing, right? Writing, you have to think, right? And put your stuff down on paper. Of course, that takes time, and teachers don't want to assign writing because it's more time for us to grade. But it requires, My great idea for education would be you have 2 English teachers for every grade. One's in the classroom, and the other one is doing nothing but grading papers and sitting down and giving feedback. And I think that would revolutionize, because you can't fake writing either. You can't copy it, right? You have to think, and you have to think critically, right? And if you're talking about controversial issues, it really would be good.
If I could just add my own 2 cents to that, from where I sit now as a college professor, my experience is that the students here that I work with are very voluble. They're great orally. They are able to articulate positions and to kind of pick apart argument pretty well. I'm very impressed. I have not been impressed with the quality of their writing. And it is a real concern. It has been for a while. I don't know what the answer is. The answer is not just telling them to go to the writing center and have somebody work on that. I do know that there are summer programs designed for people like me to help me figure out how to design better assignments so that we are scaffolding and helping our students write better. But it is a real challenge for them. They can speak well, but they are not able to translate that into the written word. And we, of course, I'm saying we, I'll say I, look at what's happening in the secondary schools. Are they getting the kind of training that they need? Time crunches are all over the place. And I hear what you're saying about one in and one out. If that was if I could kind of boil my concerns down to a central one, in terms of what we are seeing, what I am seeing here, it revolves around that issue. You know, their ability to express themselves cogently, concisely, powerfully with the written word.
Well, I would add to that. Our school does senior project. Like I said before, every kid has to do a senior project. And I have been shocked they get to be a senior, and it's a year-long course. You even have a class time for it. And you can leave and you can do it on anything you want. Anything. And when you tell them that, they have no idea what they're interested in. Like, through SOLs, through this like very tight curriculum, through these targeted learning points and all these things, they have become, it breaks my heart, incurious. You say you get to choose, and they go, what? What do you mean I don't even know what that means. And that, I think, is dangerous. I think you guys have lots of choices in your curricula, in your lessons and things, and I think that's really great. But like, they get it, they do it, and then they go to the next, and they don't get to say, what part of this is like, ooh, what part of this am I interested in? That's kind of cool. Maybe I'll go look at that. Or they'll go in and out, or they'll only look at the things that are cool for them to be doing. They're into their video games, or they're into whatever's cool among the other kids. They don't bring that kind of curiosity and interest into academic pursuits, so that when they go to college, they're like, I don't know, I don't like school. School is just in and out, taking tests, take the SOL, up or down vote on your SOL, and move to the next grade. I feel like, writing, reading, thinking, time to be curious, time to do the inquiry, to say, well, what part of the civil rights movement am I interested in? Which person seems really interesting that I'd like to research more about? And I've seen it with my kids going to college, that it's, they're not sure. They haven't had time to explore any of it. And then you drop them in college, and they're like, what am I supposed to do here? There's too many choices. I can't even begin to evaluate what I like or what I want to be studying for 4 years. And so, we have teachers at our school who are teaching at 0.17. They have 180 kids. They're teaching 6 out of 7 periods. They can't assign a paper.
But this is an argument for what you have all been encouraging. Inquiry-based models. Get the students to own it, right? Get them invested in it. It's what they were talking about this morning. Democratizing the classroom, the student-centered approaches, that's all effective. That's when you're engendering that curiosity. You're helping them ask questions, how to formulate questions so they can then go find their own answers. And I think that's what we want from a process perspective. That's where we want them to be. We're just about up at 3:20. Any final thoughts from folks on the dais, on the floor? Yeah.
Can I just say, we've been at this since last, fall? Yeah. So it was really nice conversing with all of you today, and this being not necessarily our final product, but the hurrah of everything that we've done. So I can take confidence that all of us up here kind of feel that way. So thank you for coming today.
Thanks, and I'll second that. And for Alfred.
I like the baseball analogy that you talked about. You can say, hey, if anyone gives you blowback, and you say, hey, sometimes you strike out, and Ted Williams only went, batted 400. So we can have 6 bad days for every 4 good ones.
Right. The most successful players screw up 7 times out of 10. Yeah, right.
That's the first thing I thought of.
Right. Exactly. Thank you for the past year, for all the hard work that you've done and are going to continue to do over the course of. And we have to establish a calendar for finishing up, and we'll work on that. Yeah.
Somehow, some way.
I like that. In the fullness of time, as as I've heard it said. So we'll figure that out. We will be in touch with everybody. You will get info for feedback. You'll get info for your own edification on a variety of matters. And then eventually you'll get the materials themselves that you've helped to contribute to. So thanks for coming today. Thanks for your participation. Great to meet you. And I hope this sparks further conversation among all of us. Thanks. Yep.